Hey guys, welcome back to the Believe, Be Real, Be Bold podcast. I am so honored to be in the office of Alexi Neal of Transforming Trauma, Yoga, and pairing that with basically just helping people with solutions.
Yeah.
We're going to get into that in a little bit, but thank you so very much for having me in.
Yeah, thank you for being here.
Of course. I love the space. It's in Wheat Ridge, Colorado, so we're not far from home. How and why did you choose this path that you're on, this mission?
So yoga therapy was something that I found partially because I was looking for it and partially because the universe put it in front of me. I had been a yoga teacher for several years, kind of on the side, and hit a point in my own life where I realized I was very disconnected from what I had really wanted to do with my life and the way that I wanted to help people in the world. So I in a moment of actually like real high emotion and almost desperation was like, that yoga therapy thing that I heard about when I did my first teacher training, let me look into that. And it just so happened that Phoenix Rising, which is a school I ended up being certified through, was having their level 1, as it was called at the time, which is just a 4-day intensive. It was happening in 2 weeks. And rather than looking into the details of the program or anything like that, it was just that like, I can do that, you know, and said yes to it and didn't really know until I got there on the first day how perfect it was, because Chaz and I had talked for a long time about how do we meld counseling and yoga, and then I'm sitting there and they're like, this is a combination of psychology, neuroscience, yoga, and mindfulness.
All the things
like,
that we nerd out about.
I was like, thank you.
Yeah. And who is Chaz?
Chaz is my husband.
Right,
yeah.
right. Yeah. I got the pleasure of meeting him once before on Megan's birthday.
Yeah.
So we got to chit-chat a little bit, and that planted the seed in my mind about following up and coming back to a conversation with you after we met one-to-one. Really, it's just the universe is bringing things to us at the right time.
Oh, yeah.
And who is it that you find coming to you for help and assistance?
Yeah, so I ended up focusing specifically on trauma with the yoga therapy, because I realized as I was studying it that trauma really was not being served by the traditional modalities that we have for mental health treatment, and that this embodied modality was really the missing piece in trauma treatment. And so since I have been putting that out there, I am getting a lot of people coming to me that are not like they don't have great therapists, they really do. It's just that there hits a certain point where talking about it isn't changing anything anymore, and they need to move it through their bodies, they need to do the work in their nervous system, and so they start looking for something else, and usually I'm not something else. And the types of trauma varies wildly, from sexual trauma to domestic violence to childhood abuse to micro traumas, microaggressions in our world, and just sometimes living in this culture, there are things that create that stress and overwhelm in our bodies. So yeah, that's a wide range.
And you said a word in there, that embodied.
Yeah.
Explain a little bit more about what you mean by that.
Yeah, so what I mean is that we are not just coming from up here, but we're dropping our awareness and processing down into the physical body, including the heart, working with the nervous system and doing what's sometimes known as bottom-up work, where what's happening down here can actually have a huge impact on what's happening up here. And we can find wisdom from a place that's not so much the analytical mind, that's very much so stuck in like what just happened or what's going to happen, but is coming from a really present moment, very clear awareness. And that's what we sometimes call embodied wisdom, you know. And so one of my favorite things about this work is that I'm not telling people what the wisdom is. I'm not telling them what they need to do in order to fix them, you know. It's all about them facilitating a process where they can get so in touch with what is really happening right now that wisdom emerges from them. And that's so part of the magic with trauma, because it can be so disempowering. And then you come into a modality where it's like, you have the answers. And when they actually feel that and have that experience of having the answers, it's transformative.
I'm getting like emotional just thinking about it, because jiu-jitsu does that for me.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
But not everybody is the right fit for something that intense. So walk me through just like a typical structure of your session, or how does somebody get started, and then where do they go from there with you?
Yeah, so one thing about this work is that there isn't really a formula, but every session does follow this basic format of our intention is to get into the body, to get into what we call direct experience, where your brain is very aware of right now, this moment. You're experiencing it directly rather than through the filters of analysis and masks that we often put on it. So usually the way that we do that is through some sort of movement, which depending on what body is in the room, you know, how vigorous that is or not, but something that creates a little sensation in the body and maybe gets the heart rate going a little bit if that's appropriate, because I think we all know that when that happens, we tend to get a little bit more present. And then we get into postures where we're looking for what we call the edge, which is that place of like just enough sensation, but it's not overwhelming, but something interesting is happening there, something that we can, again, pull that awareness into and really sit with and be curious about. And then from there, it's just following whatever is happening in the body and moving through edges and dialoguing about what's happening in them, and having that conversation, not so much between me and the client, but actually the client with themselves, having that conversation. And then, of course, we got to get up out of the body because you got to be able to walk out of here and drive and all of that. So we have to come back up into the head, but a piece of that is actually taking, okay, what was the embodied wisdom from that experience? And what does that mean? Why is that important in your life right now? Because there's always a connection. Our bodies are with us through every single moment of our lives, and so they carry it all too. So yeah, some way of maybe putting it into action, or maybe just bringing awareness to a certain part of your life and how that might be connecting to your body. And when it comes to resolving trauma, sometimes those action steps are actually like the tangible ways that shifts start to happen, even while you're still in the thick of the healing process. You know, these like little tiny baby steps that start to build.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'm just reminded of a great book that I read called The Body Keeps the Score.
Oh yeah, love that book.
So in the muscles, in the central nervous system, somatically,
Yeah.
the body is storing information,
Right.
memories, and
Yes.
pain and trauma.
Yes.
And 2 years ago this month,
Yeah.
I was in just a minor sideswipe car accident on my way to work. I normally worked out with my 9 o'clock client because we were both interested in Olympic lifting and we were both interested in sports performance, but got sideswiped. And all of this trauma started from my past, came up and out of just something. So you called it a micro trauma. That's something very survivable. Like,
Sure.
we can go about our day the rest of the day, but
Right.
I started to represent and present chiropractic need, like my low back. I had a tournament later that week for jiu-jitsu, and I just absolutely just like fell apart.
Yeah.
And so I'm not sure if you were at the Paraloom meeting December 2 years ago, where we all met at Lisa's place and
No, I wasn't
as a
there.
group, and that's the
Yeah.
community that we know each other
Right.
best through. So Lisa was a guest on the podcast. We talked about the Enneagram, and
Cool.
and that's where the realization of
Yeah.
what that car accident actually released.
Yeah.
It was within a month or so.
Now, see, this is really interesting because you speak about it releasing, which started with falling apart a little bit, and on in a more contained way. That's really what we're doing here. When I talk about going to edges, we are creating discomfort, a safe and manageable amount of discomfort that is very much so co-created with the client, not me saying you got to push, you know, we're not pushing. But that's what we're looking for, because it's in those places that change happens, that release starts to happen. When we actually bring something to the surface so that we can experience it, that's where it's processing. So it's interesting that you say that this little micro trauma like woke it up for you, but also released it. Yeah.
It brought it to the surface, and mindfulness is very key. When you were talking about this earlier, that an awareness of the edge and getting to the edge so that you're more mindful, body, mind, soul connection.
Yeah.
I'm a newbie. I don't know yogic philosophy much, but I love it. So how are the chakras in tune? And you said head, heart, and gut. You didn't say gut. You said
well, and nervous system.
Okay, that's what you
and
said.
I mean, the nervous system is really relevant when it comes to trauma. And I don't know if you're familiar with polyvagal theory, but a lot of the work that I do is wrapped into that. So, but with the chakras, that's something that I mean, it depends on the client. Sometimes it comes into the session, sometimes it's just my own understanding of where these energy centers are in the body and where they're likely to, how they're likely to manifest when out of balance. And it might inform my choices around what posture we go into in order to work with what's happening now emotionally, you know. But yeah, those different centers, I mean, it's amazing because we can work with them through posture, we can work with them through more vigorous movements, we can work with them through breath. But you're right, with all of it, the key component is awareness and mindfulness. And I have seriously had symptoms resolve for my clients without us necessarily like physically manipulating anything in the body to resolve them, but bringing awareness to them. Just sitting with something that maybe we've been turning away from for a long time. And yeah, it's amazing, but that's because we're working with those energetics. And when we turn our awareness, we are bringing energy into that space. And when we sit with awareness and acceptance, now we're bringing positive energy into that space. And that's super healing. And yet also, I mean, it's super simple, not necessarily easy, but it is simple to sit with ourselves, to accept ourselves. I mean, it's a tall order sometimes, but you know, but I like that's where I get inspired, is because this is something that every human being is capable of. You know, like we're not broken. We all have this ability to heal. Oftentimes we need support in order to get into that space where we can activate it for ourselves. But this isn't inaccessible. Yeah.
You're showing me inspiration now. What was the original inspiration? Why you and Chaz were talking about it so much?
Oh, I think that was probably my own felt experience in the practice of yoga growing up, where I knew that there was a piece of that, and I didn't really have the words for it at the time, but like I knew that there was a piece of that was helping me to move through life more easily, helping me to cope with challenges more easily. And then I think as that progressed and it started to become a little bit less about the postures and the movement and the physical practice and more about the mindfulness and sense of connection with the world and spiritual connection. And yeah, so that was where we're like, okay, there's something happening in that practice that when you pair it with talking and verbally processing, you know, some of it is like right brain, left brain connectivity, you know, and when you do that, like there's even more power because you're accessing healing from all angles rather than just one at a time. Yeah.
Is there a certain amount of talk therapy that's going along with poses and with connecting with energy source and the postures?
So in a yoga therapy session, we are dialoguing, but it looks very different from talk therapy because I am asking questions that are all designed to help the client become more aware of what's happening right now, and then often just reflecting back to them so that they might be able to rehear the really important pieces of it and then hone in on the really key points. And then when we're integrating at the end, I might guide a little bit of inquiry around how this relates to life and whatnot. So the dialogue is within those parameters where we're not going to go into stories. And actually that's something with trauma survivors that I hear a lot, is this immense gratitude of not having to tell the story again. That being said, the story is always welcome to be here because that can be therapeutic, but many of them have told it so many times they are done telling that story. And I don't actually need to know it in order for this process to work. So yeah, we don't have to get into all of that. And in session, we're actually pretty intentionally not getting into the story behind it. We want to be with the sensations because awareness of the sensations is what's going to create change in this side of the work. Now, for some clients, taking that embodied wisdom sometimes wakes up a whole bunch of patterns in their life and interesting nuances and complications that they get a lot of benefit then from being able to go and sit with my husband and sit in talk therapy and verbally process through all of that. And of course he has he was a meditation teacher for years, still is actually, but that's sort of his foundation in psychology. And so it works really well together because he still has that mindfulness component and can even help people reference the body and see what came up in session and then just process more verbally.
Right. Right, because he's a counselor.
Yeah.
And you guys are partnered together.
Yeah.
In every way.
Yeah.
Here for this main mission and vision that you have for each other. So.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about what he does beyond the meditation and beyond. Is it talk therapy that he does, or is it cognitive behavior therapy? What type of therapy is he working with?
So his foundation is actually humanistic psychology, which I forgot to mention was another amazing thing, is most of the psychology influences on the yoga therapies from the humanistic field too. So this is Carl Rogers, whose most famous quote is, "We are all our own highest authority." Like, we know what's happening in here, and nobody outside will ever be able to tell us that. So they work really well together. But yeah, so that's the foundation of his work, is really honoring that power within each of us as well. And it's more traditional talk therapy, but like I said, with that mindfulness component of it. If we want to be with what's here right now, we do. So
I'm spot on with our community. Like, self-awareness and personal discovery is really a big foundation for self-love, respect, acceptance, and so forth, that it takes to find relationships worthwhile and long-lasting love.
Right.
So let's switch gears a little bit. When did you find the Enneagram? And tell us a little bit about your type when you first found out.
So the Enneagram I actually found through Lisa and Paralum. That was my first exposure to it. And the first time that I did that, so that would have been about 2 years ago. I was a solid 3.
The achiever.
Yes. Yes, definitely the achiever. And my wing at the time was actually the reformer. And my wing has shifted to the giver. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So a 3-wing 2, you guys are called the charmer. Very charming, but very driven career-wise.
Yeah. Now, see, it's interesting that you say that, the charmer. I have a bodily response to hearing that. It's just like, because to me, there's almost a negative to that, which I don't think it's meant that way, but it's so interesting how words hit us differently.
Right.
Like the charmer to me is almost like the charming salesperson that's gonna sell you snake oil,
It can be seen in so many different ways for the achiever. Like, success for the achiever is not always money. It's not always career.
Yeah.
It could be the cleanest house you've ever seen. It could be the most well-raised family. Yeah. So it really is the individual's choice. What they achieve in.
Sure.
So it, as far as the charm goes, like, you did. If you're watching this on YouTube, Alexi's body language actually sat back in her chair when she was talking about the charmer. Which is totally matched your words. It's really cool to see. And why I bring up the achiever, and when we're talking about your business today, is like, how does your business give you value and worth as the achiever?
So, do you mind if I throw this through the lens of Ayurveda, actually?
Yeah,
because I was really fascinated when I redid this recently and had the 3 and 2 combined, because so in Ayurveda, this is the sister science of yoga, and there's these 3 branches of energetic components that all of us have in varying degrees, and I am Pitta as my dominant one and Kapha as my secondary one. Pitta is the fire energy. It's very ambitious and driven and fast moving and go, very achievement oriented, so lines up fabulously with the 3 achiever. And Kapha is a very nurturing, soft, warm, kind of cozy energy, actually a little bit slower and like more mindful and a little bit more present than the very future driven Pitta energy. And so it matches up really beautifully with the giver. So when I think about like success in my business, and the reason that I bring that up is because that's been my lens for a while, is acknowledging that yes, I am very achievement oriented, but what I want to achieve is the helping others, transforming trauma for other people, like that's really what I want. And I mean, I say that and I'm aware of like a voice in my brain that goes just like, yeah, you make yourself sound all selfless, you're in it for other people, but like really it is for me, because I get so much joy and fulfillment from being able to show up in that way for others. So yeah.
In your day-to-day, is there a lot of intuition that comes in for you? And how do you use that to your advantage for your clients to see results?
Yeah, the intuition piece is something that we actually really unpacked in my yoga therapy training, because a big piece of what makes this work is that the practitioner has very clearly informed choices. And sometimes intuition gets put in this role of like, well, I don't know why. I don't know why I wanted to make that choice. I don't know why. It was just my intuition. And there's a piece of that that's actually minimizing what intuition really is. Because first, let me say, I think there's two different types of intuition. There's one that comes from the gut space, which is a little bit more survival oriented, and tends to be the area that gives us signals when like something is a big no, or when something is a big yes, especially like when we're meeting somebody that we're going to really connect with and we get those kind of butterfly feelings.
I went immediately to dating when
yes.
you said both of those things.
Yeah, for sure. Like,
you just see it on my face.
Yeah. I just saw your eyes sort of flick out. I was like, yeah. And then there's a different type of intuition that is more connected with what we call the third eye, that chakra, which is actually like the seat of a lot of really complex processing in our brain, and parts of our brain that we aren't really conscious of, like it doesn't come through in thoughts, but is taking in everything at a rate that we couldn't be conscious of really, and processing it. And so really like that to me is what intuition is, when I know something because there is a part of my brain that has processed it more, maybe faster than my thoughts have caught up. But to be able to go back and see, like, it was that little movement that gave me the clue to go there, you know? And it might have happened so quickly that, like, we're going to call that intuition, but really it's just profound presence. Mm-hmm. It's just being so present with somebody that you catch all the little things, and our brains, the fabulous machines that they are just doing the speed processing for us.
Yep, I can totally relate to that. Does that cover all of your life? Maybe your relationship with your husband too? Of like this clarity of thought, or this presence and the mindfulness that you have come up to?
I mean, I think there's nonstop growth in that, you know? Like, I am not a monk. And I have my fair share of completely unmindful moments.
We're only human.
Well, yeah, totally. And it's really important to me. And another of my favorite things about doing the work that I do is that it necessitates that I keep up with my own practice, and that I'm aware of my own edges that are showing up and how my own lenses could be impacting my work with my clients. So yeah, there's a big piece of that. In my relationship with Chaz, there was a heavy element of knowing when we met each other. That was actually from both sides, and very early on it was like, this is big, you know? Like, and that I think was a combination of those two intuitive places where just that real deep felt sense of yes, and like sort of being able to take in everything about him and vision out a little bit into the future. And especially when we started talking about the future and seeing how in alignment everything was, just like, okay, this can be a partnership, you know?
Let me ask you about the vision for the business. Did it come before or after you met Chaz?
After.
Okay, for sure. And why I asked that is because it's more enthusiastic about you and Chaz than you were talking about the business. Well,
yeah, I guess that's true. I mean, business is business, but the purpose of life, I think, is relationships and love and all of that. And like, that's what I'm here for. So, and I think there is something very compelling to that achiever mentality, like that achiever-giver combo of being in a partnership and in a relationship where we can help each other to grow. And, you know, this business, as much as about helping other people, also about facilitating that growth and like having the challenges that come along with running a business be a part of the path, you know, and how we show up for each other being a part of that path. And holy crap, has he been a mirror for me in many, many ways. Like that time of crisis that I was in. So, okay, let me back up a little bit. Like when I found Phoenix Rising Yoga Therapy, it was actually because of an argument with Chaz. And he was upset that I had not been able to detach from this high stress job that I was in. And it was a Friday night and we had plans and I was all up in my phone.
You're not alone there.
Yeah. And he got frustrated, and I got frustrated back. And, in the heat of the moment, the words actually came out of my mouth of like, I am doing this for us so we can have the house and the high-paying job and all of the things and send the kids to college and the yard and all of that. Like, that's what I'm doing this for. And he just like looked at me and he goes, yeah, stop.
Yeah.
And it was just like, oh, shit, you're right.
Because it wasn't your mission, it wasn't
Right.
your purpose.
Right.
And that's exactly why I asked that question about why you were so much more enthusiastic about the relationship you had. Because that could be the source of commitment and purpose for the achiever. And I read that in you, and I'm so glad that you responded in that exact answer.
Yeah.
It was almost like we're mirroring each other now.
Yeah.
And we're in this space of energy,
Yeah.
which you talked about multiple times so far today.
Yeah.
And I feel it, and you feel it, and it's just this culmination of a direction.
Right.
In your
it's co-creation.
Yeah.
This happens in session too in yoga therapy. It's like you get into a space and there's a sense of presence, and in that presence there is this like pregnant space where creation can start to happen. And that's just the meeting of the energy there.
Yeah, what's going to come of it? What birth out of that creation?
And moment to moment you just find out.
And you found that out along the way with your husband too.
Oh yeah.
And that co-creation, or two flames finding each other in a moment, and the intuition, that clarity of thought.
Yeah.
It's like the decision was made long before the decision is made.
Yeah.
Yeah. So all of this being said, is that why clients see results from your work? Your intuition, your mission, your power, your passion for it, and then also just the one direction and not deviating from it.
I think that is definitely part of it, and the other part of it is that and I think this is all wrapped up in there because this is all about like what it means to be human, and that's something that with this work and the way that it is working with people, it is so human. And everything you're talking about, like the energy and how we just naturally connect with each other and co-create and all of that, like this is built into our DNA, that like this is how we do things, this is how we be. So I think that's really why the work is so effective, is because we're not trying to force something that isn't natural. We're enhancing what our systems naturally want to do, which is to connect, which is to create, which is to tap into something beyond this physical body,
And we have oftentimes forgotten about that after the drive for materialism, or the drive for status, or the drive for success in our American culture, the 9 to 5 or the corporate life where you came from. And hotel and restaurant management. It's the least corporate environment of all corporations, because you're 3-shift employees if necessary. So that hustle and bustle of life where you were in your phone on a Friday night was holding you back from your true purpose
and
of
I was
being.
so anxious. I was so anxious too. I just had the worst anxiety at that time. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, that's what we're here for. Earlier, even in our conversation, you said past thinking, forward thinking. Well, depression comes from thinking about the past. Anxiety comes from thinking about the future.
Oh yeah.
And if we don't have a practice in our life like jujitsu or yoga or meditation or mindfulness, whatever practice that may be, you lose it.
Yeah.
Like you lose focus, or you step off of center.
Right.
There's no alignment.
Yeah, it's the catch-22 of our amazing prefrontal cortex. It's this super-powered computer that gives us the ability to do all of this high-level processing, but a lot of that high-level processing is what just happened, all of the many, many ways that you could analyze what just happened and what is about to happen, all of the many ways that you could predict what is about to happen. It's an amazing thing, and it starts to run the show. It's like it's one piece of our brain, and even more than that, one piece of our entire system, and it does get to run the show a lot because it's so powerful and just constantly wants to drag us in one of those two directions. And so as much as the embodied work is about the body, it is also about lighting up different parts of the brain and getting them to communicate in more smooth ways. You mentioned actually a while ago how like trauma is stored in the body. Traumatic memories are stored in a different part of the brain than regular memories. The way that we usually remember things is very linear, and you can tell it in a story, like you can narrate the story of your life. And trauma is usually a bit different in that there's not always quite words to describe it. Those memories are stored in a way that's kind of outside the timeline of things and can get jumbled up in its own timeline. And usually is remembered not through words, but through sensations and colors and images and
Emotions.
Sounds and smells, the same language that our body communicates with. You know, like that's why that connection is so powerful, is because that part of the brain speaks the same language that our body does.
Mind-blowing stuff.
Yeah.
Mind-blowing stuff. So how does awareness of the Enneagram help your clients specifically?
Starting to, like, when you can see patterns, that's a piece of profound presence, you know, to be able to start to see patterns in people and make informed choices of how you want to be with them, recognizing like, okay, I can see that this person is, then the one of course I recognize the most is the achiever, you know, and I know because of my own practice how that is likely to change the way that they experience the work, you know. And so,
Maybe they want to get every pose perfect.
Oh yeah.
And they want the process to be perfect.
And they want to know they want to know what the right answer is. When I check in about what's happening, they're like, "Well, what do you want me to say?" And I want you to say what's happening, you know.
And the achiever is truly unique, even though they're in the heart center of the triad. They're a feeling being, but they oftentimes put their feelings in a box. Can you relate to that, or can you see that pattern in your clients when they come to you?
Yeah, absolutely. Or the feeling is not necessarily being allowed to be fully expressed because there's judgment around the feeling. There's judgment around whether or not it's valid, whether or not the perhaps intensity of the emotion is okay, you know. And this is something that happens a lot with trauma too, is that something seemingly very small, if there's a connection to the trauma in it, can have what society would consider a disproportionately large emotional response attached to it. So there's often this judgment around how they are experiencing emotion, whether or not it is right or wrong, because they want to do it right, even coming down to feeling, they want to emote correctly. And so it does get sort of limited in that way.
That's so funny to me. Like, it's just like spot on.
Yeah.
And you see a correlation between trauma and relationships.
Oh yeah.
And give me just a brief description of maybe a pattern you saw where relationships came to you at a time.
The biggest piece of trauma in relationships where there can be difficulty is trust. Whether or not actually the trauma was related to a relationship, though so often it is, there is a foundational trust in our world being safe that is shaken by trauma. And so no matter what the context of the trauma was, usually there is some breach of trust that needs to be healed. And so that's a really big thing, because I mean, trusting, actually one of the biggest things I've seen particularly with women is, how do I trust my own judgment? How do I trust my own intuition about, you know, and is you know, if I know that I'm having this response to somebody because perhaps it, you know, it connects to my trauma in some way, this particular pattern of theirs or this particular personality piece, do I honor that and say that person is not for me? Or do I fight that? Because, like there's this sense of like, I don't know what's okay anymore. I don't trust myself to know what is safe and what is not safe anymore. That can be a really big piece of it, for them to start trusting themselves. For all of us to trust ourselves is a really big deal, you know. And that gets impacted in a variety of ways, but trauma is a big one.
I can see that correlation so much. When the achiever or yourself is at your best, do you become more cooperative and committed to others, maybe say in this community you have built here?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, when the achiever in me is at its best, there is always that sense of interconnection and collaboration. And when that achiever mentality gets a little bit out of balance is when I want to take it all on myself, and just
isolate maybe a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. And there's this sense of like I have to do it all by myself and nobody can help me, and that's a spiral that hopefully I become aware of earlier rather than later.
At that time, would you find yourself giving up on your personal practice?
Yeah.
Would you find yourself
Totally
forgetting self-care and self-love?
It's actually sometimes avoiding.
You're right.
Yeah.
Much like the Enneagram Type 9 would, because when you disintegrate, that's where you go to in stress.
Yeah,
It's
totally.
It's more like how slow moving a sloth would be.
Yeah, totally.
So that's on the opposite end
Right.
of the cooperative and committed to others.
Yeah, and interestingly, one of the things that I've learned about myself is that I can hold myself back by getting on the hamster wheel of doing, like all the little not really maybe very important tasks, and just getting so caught up in that I'm actually not moving forward with the things that will make the biggest difference. And oftentimes that pattern shows up for me when there's some level of fear, when there's some edge in what it is that I'm trying to do in a collaboration, or somebody that I want to work with, or something that I'm trying to co-create. If there's an edge that shows up in that, yeah, totally. It just goes down this spiral of like, well, I don't really want to feel that edge, and so I'm going to avoid it, which means I'm not going to show up to my practice because that's where I'm going to have to feel it, But then, then it just becomes this stagnation. Yeah.
Absolutely. Processing that. That's really big.
Yeah, fear, man.
Yeah. How do you approach your relationship with fear?
Mm.
Do you bust through the wall like I would as an 8, or do you?
No, I try to give a little space to it. That's one of my practices of acceptance. And fear is a difficult thing to accept, but I have found that most of the time when I can actually recognize that I've gotten into a pattern, and that pattern is based around fear and avoidance, the first layer of it for me usually is saying, okay, I'm afraid of this. That's okay. I'm avoiding it. Like, all right, that was a fine coping mechanism, like it's not the direction that I want to go in, but the first step is always to soften around it. Say like, okay, I see you doing that. Like, I see the part of you that is trying to protect me from the unknown there, so be with that first. That's always my go-to. And then usually just from that, just giving it space, things start to loosen up a little bit, because usually that acceptance and space is what lets me get back to my practice, which starts to move whatever is happening through my body. And next thing you know, I'm like in cobra pose or something like that, and this brilliant like little ding goes off, and I'm like, I gotta write that person an email because I just got the inspiration back. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
If your message resonates with somebody today, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
You could go to our website, which is, our business is the Neal Center for Counseling and Yoga Therapy, and nealcounselingandyoga.com is our website. And you can find us on Facebook too, and then there's the Facebook group Transforming Trauma, which you're familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so very much for your time.
Yeah.
If there's one thing we didn't touch on today, or just briefly breezed over, and that you want to go deeper into, what would that be?
I could always nerd out about polyvagal theory, especially because we were just talking about fear, actually.
How does it correlate between fear and the polyvagal theory?
So polyvagal theory, it has a couple of different foundations. So the first one being this concept of neuroception, where there's this process constantly happening in the background where the most primitive part of our brain is assessing our environment for danger. And if that part of our brain says that the environment is dangerous, actually the prefrontal cortex doesn't get a say in how the body and the nervous system is going to respond.
Fight or flight.
Exactly, or freeze.
Okay.
And so this is the ladder of polyvagal theory. Is at the top of the ladder is this open, connected space, like we were talking about when the achiever is in its ideal space. It is open and connected, and willing to collaborate, and just generally feeling safe. One rung down the ladder is that sympathetic nervous system that you just referenced, the fight or flight. This is the like something has to change. I have to physically do something about it, which of course floods our body with adrenaline. And then actually at the bottom of the ladder is this shut down space, the dorsal vagal space, where whatever is happening in our environment is perceived to be so dangerous actually that nothing can be done about it. And the only route is protection, is to close off and put up a big old wall and to try to numb out of the situation. And the body actually gets flooded with opioids oftentimes. And so yeah, that's sort of the numbing space. There are two things about this theory that I think are really, really important, especially for trauma survivors. One is recognizing that neuroception is not a conscious process, because a lot of times there's this pervasive message in the healing world, like the change your thoughts, change your life. Now, I want to be clear, that is super true. For a lot of people, trauma is different. Yeah, because
you can't be so positive that you come out of it. Yeah, that's
and often trying to change your thoughts when those thoughts are actually happening below the level of your consciousness creates so much discouragement that it just gets into a shame cycle, you know. So that's a really big thing to know, is that the way that your nervous system responds anyway. Now with mindfulness, you can still make choices about how you act in the world, outside of the way that your nervous system might be responding to it, but that takes a lot of practice to be able to interrupt that fight or flight mode and make a different choice, you know, but your body is still going to feel what it's going to feel. It's still going to get activated in the way it's going to activate, or deactivated in the way it's going to. So that's really important. And then the other piece of this theory that's I really love, and that is so helpful to know, is that when you are coming from that space of being shut down, and actually let me back up a little bit. These three spaces, like we can talk about them in the context of trauma and really big traumas. We can see how people totally shut down, and dissociation and actually piecing off parts of our brain is a intense version of that dorsal vagal space being activated. However, like, I mean, I think we've all had the experience where somebody says something to us and there's a part of us that just goes doosh, just puts the wall up. And that's that same part of our nervous system trying to protect us from it. So there's very degrees to it. But the important thing with that ladder, and I don't generally like hierarchical things, so this was interesting for me, is that recognizing that if you are in that space of being really shut down, you cannot pop from there right up to being open and connected. And for a lot of trauma survivors, if you've been operating in that space of depression and disconnection and isolation, the first thing, and numbing, the first thing that you are going to feel as you start moving up the ladder is a sense of activation that can sometimes take the form of anger, and can sometimes feel uncomfortable in the body. And so that tends to, if it's given without context, send people back down into that shutdown space, because at least that's familiar, that's known, and numb is more comfortable than angry.
Trust me, I spent 20 years there.
So you know this. So it can be really powerful to say, to recognize, like, okay, that is a path. Like that is actually a good sign when some of that starts to show up, because you know that you're heading up the ladder, and that it is through that sense of activation and through actively doing something, which we can do here. We can get into the body and do something with that energy that is going to allow us to pop up into the ventral vagal state. And even if it's just for a brief moment, have that experience of being connected and open and feeling safe again. Which just lays the foundation for that to become more and more of a presence. So, yeah.
Nailed it.
Yeah. Nailed it. Why, thank you.
All of that resonated with me.
Cool.
Because I did spend so long so much of my life numb.
Yeah.
Numb emotionally, numb mentally, numb purposefully. Like, didn't know what purpose was because I couldn't touch it.
Yeah.
I just couldn't tune in and trust myself that I could get there.
Yeah, trusting yourself that you could get there.
Yeah.
That's a really big one.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, again, I want to say thank you very much.
Thank you.
And it was my pleasure to come by, tour your office, and
Cool.
and spend the time with you.
Awesome. Yeah, I appreciate you, Dave.
Thank you.
Yeah.